The alarm pierced through Station 19 at 11:47 p.m. like a knife through silence. Not the gentle ping of a medical assist or the routine blare of a kitchen fire. This was the five-alarm shriek that meant someone's world was ending. I'm Pamela Smith. I'm 28. I run the youngest fire department command in the city's history. And tonight, 20 years after my parents left me to burn alive, the universe decided to test exactly who I'd become. The address scrolled across my screen, 1247 Oakwood Towers. My blood turned to ice water. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I know that intersection. Not the gleaming high-rise that stands there now, but the ghost of what came before. The crumbling tenement where apartment 4B used to exist. Where an 8-year-old girl once hid in a coal chute while flames ate everything she'd ever known. Where David and Linda Smith walked away from their daughter's screams and never looked back. 20 years. I'd avoided that neighborhood like it carried plague. Watched from department records as they tore down the old buildings, erected monuments to gentrification, and paved over every trace of the life that almost ended there. But I never forgot. You don't forget the sound your own mother's footsteps make when they're walking away forever. Captain Rodriguez looked up from his coffee. "Chief, you good? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus has known me since I was 8. He was the rookie who pulled me from that coal chute, unconscious and barely breathing. He's watched me grow up in foster homes, graduate valedictorian despite everything, claw my way through the fire academy with something that looked like vengeance but felt like purpose. He knows my tells. "I'm fine," I said, already suiting up. "Meridian District response. High-rise residential. How many trapped?" "At least 6 confirmed. Buildings got structural issues, evacuation stalled on the upper floors." I should have delegated. Should have sent Rodriguez with the A-team while I coordinated from base. That's what chiefs do. But something in my chest was screaming that this wasn't random. This wasn't Tuesday night overtime in a city that burns people up and spits them out. This was reckoning. The truck bay doors opened like jaws. Engine 19, ladder 12, and my command unit rolled into the night with sirens that sounded like war cries. In the rearview mirror, the station grew smaller until it disappeared. And with it, the last 20 years of careful distance I'd built between Pamela Smith, fire chief, and the nameless girl who once prayed to suffocate before the flames found her. The radio crackled. "Command, we've got visual on the structure. 12-story residential, fire originated somewhere around the 8th floor, climbing fast. Residents evacuating through stairwells, but we've got holdouts on 12. 12. Of course it was 12. The Meridian District looked like another planet after dark. Glass towers reflecting streetlights, doormen in uniforms that cost more than most people made in a month, valet stands for cars worth more than houses. But underneath the polish, I could still see the bones. The intersection where I used to wait for school buses that never came. The corner where Mrs. Patterson used to sell newspapers until the city decided her corner looked better with a Starbucks. The alley where I learned to run fast enough to outpace the kids who knew I wore the same clothes 3 days straight. I pulled up to 1247 Oakwood Towers and stepped into air that tasted like money and smoke. Chief on scene, establishing command post on the north side. "Rodriguez, get me building schematics. I want floor plans, evacuation routes, and structural reports from the last inspection." The building rose into darkness like a middle finger pointed at my past. 12 floors of luxury apartments, each unit probably worth more than everything my foster families ever owned combined. Floor-to-ceiling windows, balconies big enough for furniture most people couldn't afford. And somewhere up there, people who had never wondered if they'd eat tomorrow, we're about to learn what it felt like when the world tried to erase them. I set up my command station and tried to focus on protocols, ladder placement, water pressure, wind direction, the technical dance that turns chaos into survival. But my hands were shaking, and not from the October cold. "Command, this is Engine 19. We've got the stairwells clear up to the 10th floor. 2 residents transported for smoke inhalation, both stable, but we've got a problem on 12. Go ahead, Engine 19. 2 residents trapped in 12F, elderly couple. Stairs are compromised above 11, and the fire's climbing the external walls. We're going to need the ladder. 12F, the 12th floor, Unit F, the same relative position as apartment 4B in the building that used to stand here. I looked up through my binoculars and saw them. 2 figures in the window, waving frantically. The woman had gray hair pulled back in a bun. The man was gesturing like he was used to being listened to. They looked scared. They looked desperate. They looked exactly like David and Linda Smith. 20 years. 20 years since I'd seen them. 20 years since they'd walked out of a hospital room where their 8-year-old daughter was fighting for her life and never came back. 20 years since they'd collected their insurance money and disappeared into whatever hole people like them crawl into when the heat gets too high. And now they were here, in the window, trapped, helpless, looking down at me with the same faces that had looked down at me when I was 8 years old and begging them not to leave. Except this time, I was the one holding their lives in my hands. The ladder truck extended toward 12F like a mechanical prayer. I watched David and Linda Smith through my binoculars and felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart, that had been broken so long ago the pieces had turned to scar tissue. This was something deeper. Something that sounded like the 8-year-old girl who used to think her parents were gods. They looked older, softer around the edges. Linda's hair had done completely silver, and David's face carried lines that spoke of too much sun and not enough sleep. They were dressed well, him in a button-down that probably cost more than my first month's rent, her in jewelry that caught the emergency lights like trapped stars. Insurance money buys a lot of polish. Apparently, it doesn't buy peace. Chief? Rodriguez appeared at my elbow. He'd been watching me watch them, and his eyes held the kind of concern that comes from knowing someone's tells. You need to step back. Let me coordinate the rescue. I should have said yes, should have handed him the radio and walked away and let him save the people who'd tried to kill me. That's what the manual says. That's what 20 years of therapy and meditation and carefully constructed emotional distance was supposed to prepare me for. Instead, I said, set up the ladder. I want Tommy on point with Jackson as backup. Full safety protocols. These people don't get to die on my watch. Rodriguez studied my face like he was reading a map to somewhere he didn't want to go. Pamela, what aren't you telling me? The thing about Marcus Rodriguez is that he's been saving lives longer than I've been breathing without assistance. He pulled a child from a coal chute 20 years ago and watched her grow up in a system that breaks more kids than it fixes. He knows the difference between professional concern and personal demons. He also knows when someone's about to make a decision that can't be unmade. Those people up there, I said, pointing toward 12F, they're not just residents. They're David and Linda Smith, my biological parents. The words tasted like ash, like admitting to a cancer that had been eating you alive for decades. Rodriguez went very still, the kind of still that veteran firefighters get when they realize the routine call just became something else entirely. The people who left me in the fire, yes. He was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the organized chaos of a fire scene continued. Engines pumping water, paramedics standing by, cops managing traffic and crowds, the mechanical ballet of people doing jobs they'd trained for their entire lives. None of them knew they were watching a ghost story play out in real time. You don't have to do this, Rodriguez said finally. I can take the rescue. You can coordinate from here. No, the word came out harder than I intended. I'm the chief. Those are residents in my district, and whatever they did 20 years ago, they're human beings who need help. What I didn't say, I need to look them in the eye. I need them to know who I became despite everything they did to destroy me. I need them to know that the 8-year-old girl they left to die grew up to be the one person who could save them. The irony tasted like copper and smoke. Tommy, I called to our newest recruit, Tommy Brennan, 35, former foster kid who joined the department after reading about me in the Tribune. He thought I was a hero. He had no idea he was about to risk his life to save the people who'd made my childhood a cautionary tale. Yes, Chief, you're on ladder rescue for 12F. 2 residents, elderly, mobile, but scared. Standard extraction, Rodriguez will coordinate from the truck. Tommy's face lit up like Christmas morning. First major rescue of his career, and he got to work directly under the chief who'd inspired him to join the department. If only he knew. I watched him gear up and felt something twist in my stomach. Tommy Brennan believed in justice. He believed in saving people because it was right, not because it was easy. He believed in the version of me that existed in newspaper articles and department commendations. He didn't know that version of me was about to be tested by the two people who tried to erase her from existence. The ladder reached 12F. Through my binoculars, I watched David and Linda Smith see salvation approaching in the form of a young firefighter who had no idea he was saving monsters. Tommy reached the window. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see David gesturing frantically, probably demanding to know why the rescue was taking so long, probably asking if they knew who he was, probably assuming his money and status entitled him to special treatment. Some things never change.
Linda hung back, letting David handle the negotiation. The same pattern they'd followed 20 years ago when they'd sat in the lawyer's office and decided their daughter's life was worth less than their financial problems. Tommy helped David onto the ladder first. Standard protocol. Get the most mobile person out, then return for anyone who needs assistance. David climbed down with the careful movements of someone who'd never done manual labor but had enough pride to pretend he wasn't terrified. When his feet touched the ground, he straightened his shirt and looked around like he was expecting someone to thank him for surviving. His eyes found mine across the chaos of the fire scene. For a moment, time stopped. The radio chatter faded. The sound of water hitting flames disappeared. The world narrowed to two people who shared DNA and absolutely nothing else. David Smith looked at Fire Chief Pamela Smith and saw a stranger in uniform. A professional doing her job. Someone who might write him a report or ask him questions about how the fire started. He had no idea he was looking at the daughter he'd left to die. 20 years. 20 years of wondering if I'd recognize him. 20 years of therapy sessions and sleepless nights and carefully constructed emotional distance. I recognized everything. The way he held his shoulders like he was always ready for a fight. The way his eyes moved, cataloging everyone around him for potential use. The way he smiled when he thought he was safe. The same smile he'd worn when he and Linda had walked away from my hospital room for the last time. "Excuse me," he said, approaching my command station. "I need to speak to whoever's in charge here." "That's me, Fire Chief Smith." He blinked. Smith is a common name. Common enough that hearing it wouldn't trigger any memories of the daughters whose name he'd probably forgotten the day he signed the insurance papers. "Chief Smith. Good. My wife and I need to discuss some things with you about this incident. There are going to be questions about how this fire started, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page." The same page. Like we were old friends conspiring about a minor inconvenience. Like he hadn't just been pulled from a burning building that somebody set on fire for money. Like it wasn't exactly the same crime he'd committed 20 years ago. Detective Sarah Kim arrived at the scene like a bloodhound catching a scent. I watched her step out of her unmarked sedan and immediately start cataloging details that most people would miss. The wind direction, the burn patterns visible from the ground, the way the fire had climbed the building's exterior before spreading inward. Sarah Kim had a reputation in the department. She was the arson investigator who never let go. The one who built cases against insurance fraud rings that other cops had written off as too complicated. She had a personal hatred for people who burn things for money, and rumors said it stemmed from her own family being targeted years ago. Tonight, she was about to walk into the intersection of her professional obsession and my personal nightmare. "Chief Smith," she said, approaching my command station. "Preliminary assessments suggest deliberate ignition. I'm seeing accelerant patterns on the exterior walls, and the fire spread is too uniform to be accidental." Arson. Of course it was arson. "What's your timeline for investigation?" I asked. "I'll need to get inside once your team clears the structure, but from what I can see externally, this was planned. Someone wanted this building to burn." David Smith materialized at my elbow like a bad conscience. "Excuse me, detective, I couldn't help overhearing. Are you suggesting someone deliberately set fire to our building?" Sarah turned to study him with the kind of attention that made guilty people nervous. "And you are?" "David Smith. My wife and I live in 12F. We were the ones trapped upstairs."
I see. And how long have you been residents here? About 18 months. We moved here from... David paused, and I thought something flickered across his face. The micro-expression of someone editing their story in real time. From out of state. Sarah made a note. She was good at her job, which meant she was good at spotting people who were hiding something. I'll need to interview you and your wife once she's cleared by the paramedics. Standard procedure for all residents. Of course, though I should mention my wife isn't... She's not great with stress. This whole experience has been very traumatic for her. The same Linda who had once sat in a hospital waiting room and calmly discussed whether her daughter's death would pay out more than her survival. Traumatized by a little smoke and fear? I understand, Sarah said. I'll be gentle. David nodded and walked back toward the ambulance where Linda was receiving oxygen treatment. I watched him go and felt 20 years of careful emotional control starting to slip. Chief, Sarah was studying my face now, you know something about these people. It wasn't a question. Sarah Kim had built her career on reading faces and following instincts that other people ignored. Run their names through the system, I said quietly. Both of them. Full background check. Look for insurance claims, especially fire-related. Any particular reason? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The word hung in the air like smoke. Sarah Kim stared at me, and I watched her sharp mind start connecting dots that formed a picture nobody wanted to see. Jesus Christ, Pamela, those are your parents? Biologically speaking. She looked toward the ambulance, then back at me. The people you just saved from a fire are the same people who left me to burn 20 years ago, yes. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the fire scene was winding down. The flames were under control. Most residents had been evacuated and cleared by paramedics. Engine companies were transitioning from rescue to overhaul, making sure no hotspots remained to reignite. Everything was routine except for the part where my childhood trauma was being treated for smoke inhalation 30 feet away. This can't be a coincidence, Sarah said finally. No, it can't. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. First to her partner, then to someone in records, then to someone whose conversation was too quiet for me to overhear. While she worked, I watched David and Linda Smith. They were still talking, still working out whatever story they planned to tell. Linda kept glancing toward the building like she was memorizing details. David kept checking his watch like he had somewhere to be. Like they were late for an appointment that involved collecting money. Chief Smith? Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez approached my command station with the careful steps of someone who'd spent 72 years learning when to speak up and when to stay quiet. She'd been one of the first residents evacuated, and she'd been lingering at the edge of the scene ever since. Yes, ma'am. I live in 12G, right next door to the Smiths. Something in her voice made me set down my radio and give her my full attention. What can I help you with, Mrs. Vasquez? That couple, the Smiths, there's something you should know about them. Behind me, I heard Sarah's phone conversation pause. Mrs. Vasquez had the kind of voice that made people listen whether they intended to or not. Go ahead. They've been acting strange for weeks, having loud conversations about money, about insurance, about how much the building was worth. Mrs. Vasquez glanced toward the ambulance, where David and Linda were still talking, and about how sometimes accidents happen to people who deserve them. Accidents? My blood turned cold. 3 nights ago, I heard them through the walls. They were arguing about whether someone named Pamela deserved what happened to her. The man, David, he said some people get what they ask for. The woman said maybe it was time to finish what they started. Sarah Kim stepped closer. Mrs. Vasquez, are you willing to make a formal statement about what you heard? I've been waiting 20 years to tell someone what I know about David and Linda Smith. I lived in the building that used to be here, and I saw them leave that night. I heard that little girl screaming. The world tilted sideways. Mrs. Vasquez was there. She'd been there 20 years ago when David and Linda Smith had walked away from their daughter's cries for help. She'd been a witness to my abandonment.
And she'd kept that knowledge for 2 decades. You knew. I knew. And when I saw them move into this building 18 months ago, I knew they'd come back for a reason. Mrs. Vasquez looked me in the eye. They didn't just set this fire, Chief Smith. They set it for you. Commissioner Janet Walsh arrived at the scene like a politician smelling photo opportunities. Her department SUV pulled up with the kind of careful positioning that suggested she'd already mapped out which camera angles would make her look most competent for tomorrow's news cycle. I watched her emerge from the vehicle in her crisp uniform, every brass button catching the emergency lights. Janet Walsh had promoted me to chief partly because my story played well in press releases. Young woman overcomes tragic childhood to become the youngest fire chief in city history. It was the kind of narrative that made voters feel good about their tax dollars. She had no idea she was walking into the sequel. Chief Smith, she said, approaching my command station with the brisk confidence of someone who'd never had to make a life or death decision in real time. I need a status report. Media's already asking questions about response time and casualty count. Structure fire contained, all residents evacuated safely, 2 minor smoke inhalation cases, both treated and released. Detective Kim is investigating suspected arson. Arson? Walsh's political instincts kicked in immediately. Are we talking about gang activity? Domestic dispute? I need to know what we're dealing with for the press briefing. Before I could answer, Tommy Brennan appeared at my shoulder. He'd been helping with overhaul operations, but something in his expression suggested he had more on his mind than checking for hotspots. Chief, I need to talk to you about the rescue. What is it, Tommy? The couple from 12F? Something's not right about them. Walsh stepped closer, her attention shifting from media management to operational concerns. Not right how? Tommy glanced between Walsh and me, clearly uncomfortable discussing residents in front of the commissioner. But Tommy Brennan had good instincts, and when he said something wasn't right, people listened. When I reached their window, they weren't acting like people who just survived a fire. They were calculating. The man kept asking about investigation procedures. The woman kept looking at the building like she was memorizing damage patterns. Some people process trauma differently. Shock can make people behave strangely. This wasn't shock, Tommy said firmly. This was planing.
Sarah Kim materialized beside us like she'd been summoned by the word planning. Her phone was pressed against her ear, and the expression on her face suggested the conversation wasn't going well. Commissioner Walsh, I need to speak with Chief Smith privately. Walsh's political radar started pinging. If this involves departmental operations, I should be briefed. It involves an ongoing criminal investigation. I'll update you through proper channels. That was Sarah's polite way of saying, back off. Walsh didn't like it, but she knew better than to interfere with an active arson investigation, especially one that might involve her star chief. Chief Smith, I'll expect a full report within the hour. Walsh's tone carried the weight of someone who wasn't used to being excluded from important conversations. The mayor's office is already asking questions. She walked back toward her SUV, probably to coordinate damage control for whatever media storm was brewing. I watched her go and felt the familiar weight of institutional pressure settling on my shoulders. What did you find? I asked Sarah. David and Linda Smith don't exist, at least not the way they claim. The names are real, but they've been using false Social Security numbers for the past 15 years. Before that, they were David and Linda Rivera. Rivera. Their real name was Rivera, and they'd stolen mine. There's more, Sarah continued. Under their real names, they're connected to at least 6 suspicious fires across 3 states, always residential, always involving insurance payouts, always with evidence that was just contaminated enough to prevent prosecution. Tommy was staring at me like pieces of a puzzle were clicking into place. Chief, how did you know to run their backgrounds? What aren't you telling us? I looked across the scene toward the ambulance where David and Linda Rivera Smith, whatever name they were using this week, were finishing up with the paramedics. They looked like concerned residents who'd narrowly escaped disaster. They looked like victims. They looked exactly like the people who'd abandoned their 8-year-old daughter to collect insurance money 20 years ago. Because they're not random residents. They're David and Linda Rivera,
My biological parents, and this is the second time they've tried to burn down a building I was connected to. Tommy's face went white. Sarah's phone nearly slipped from her hand. The second time? Tommy asked. 20 years ago, they set fire to a tenement building on this exact spot. They left me trapped inside to die so they could claim a larger insurance payout as grieving parents. The words felt different this time, less like admitting weakness and more like stating facts that needed to be known. Tommy sat down hard on a nearby equipment case. Jesus Christ, Chief! The people I just rescued are the people who tried to kill you? Yes. And you saved them anyway? Yes. He was quiet for a long moment, processing the moral complexity of what had just happened. Tommy Brennan had joined the fire service because he believed in heroes. Tonight he was learning that heroism was more complicated than the stories made it seem. What happens now? He asked. Sarah answered before I could. Now we build a case. Mrs. Vasquez's testimony gives us witness evidence. The financial records give us motive. The arson evidence gives us method. And the fact that they specifically targeted a building 3 blocks from where they tried to kill their daughter 20 years ago gives us intent. Tommy looked up at me with something that might have been awe or horror. You knew this was personal when you ordered the rescue? I knew. And you saved them anyway. It's my job. But even as I said it, I knew it was more complicated than that. I could have delayed the rescue, could have found procedural reasons to wait for backup or better equipment, could have let the natural consequences of their choices play out while maintaining plausible deniability. I'd chosen to save them, not because they deserved it, but because I refused to become the kind of person who let people die for revenge, even if those people had tried to kill me. Even if they were still trying. The evidence room at the district police station smelled like old paper and broken promises. Sarah Kim spread 20 years of documentation across a metal table like she was dealing cards in a game where the stakes were measured in lives. David and Linda Rivera, she pointed to a mugshot from 1998, arrested for insurance fraud in Denver, charges dropped when key evidence disappeared from the crime lab. The photos showed younger versions of the people I'd just rescued. David's hair was darker, his face unmarked by whatever guilt he was carrying. Linda looked softer somehow, like there might have been traces of the mother I remembered from early childhood. Phoenix, 2003. Another residential fire, another insurance claim, another case that fell apart when witnesses stopped cooperating.
More photos. David and Linda Rivera walking out of a courthouse, free and clear. Always free and clear. St. Louis, 2007. Atlanta, 2012. Denver again in 2016. Sarah's finger traced a path across the country that looked like a roadmap of destruction. Always the same pattern. Residential fires, large insurance payouts, evidence that somehow got contaminated or lost. How did they keep getting away with it? I asked. Money and fear. They were careful about target selection, always picked buildings in transitional neighborhoods where residents were afraid to talk to police, always made sure their fires looked just accidental enough to create reasonable doubt. Tommy had been quiet since we'd arrived at the station, but now he spoke up. What about their daughter? What about Pamela? Sarah pulled out another file. This one was thicker, marked with case numbers from the Chicago Police Department and the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. August 15th, 2004. Fire at 412 Oakwood Towers. 8-year-old Pamela Rivera found unconscious in the building's coal chute. Parents claimed they'd been separated during evacuation and thought she'd escaped. She opened the file and spread out crime scene photos that I'd never seen before. The burned shell of my childhood home. The coal chute, where Rodriguez had found me. The window where David and Linda claimed they'd been calling my name. The window that faced away from the coal chute. Investigating officers noted inconsistencies in the parents' statements. David claimed he'd searched every room before evacuating. But Pamela was found in the basement, in a location that would have been accessible from her bedroom. They knew where I was? I said. The words came out flat, without emotion.
20 years of therapy, and I was still learning new ways my parents had betrayed me. It gets worse. Sarah pulled out of financial records. Insurance payout was $340,000. David and Linda Rivera collected as beneficiaries of their deceased daughter. Deceased? They filed a death certificate 3 days after the fire, listed cause of death as smoke inhalation and burns. The body was allegedly cremated before you woke up in the hospital. Tommy looked sick. They declared their own daughter dead while she was fighting for her life? It's a common insurance fraud tactic. Fake a death, collect the money, disappear before anyone asks too many questions. Usually works because most people don't survive the fires long enough to contradict the paperwork. But I had survived, and that had created a problem for David and Linda Rivera. How did they handle it when I turned out to be alive? Sarah flipped to another section of the file. They claimed clerical error, said the hospital had misinformed you about your condition. By then, they'd already collected the insurance money and left the state. The system just let them keep it? The insurance company tried to recover the funds, but David and Linda had already moved the money offshore. Legal proceedings dragged on for years before being quietly settled. I stared at the photos spread across the table. 20 years of my life reduced to case files and evidence bags. 20 years of wondering if I imagined how bad it had been, if trauma had made me remember things worse than they were. Now I knew it had been worse than I remembered. There's something else, Sarah said quietly. Mrs. Vasquez wasn't the only witness to your abandonment. There was a maintenance worker named Carlos Mendez who saw David and Linda leave the building while you were still inside screaming for help. Where is he now? Dead. Car accident 2 weeks after he gave his initial statement to police. Single vehicle collision on a clear night with perfect visibility. No skid marks, no evidence of braking. The room went quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights that probably had been flickering since before I was born. They killed him, Tommy said. It wasn't a question. Can't prove it, but Carlos Mendez was scared when he gave his statement. Said he had been getting threatening phone calls. Said people had been watching his house. And the police didn't protect him? This was 2004. Witness protection was for mob cases and federal crimes. Local arson investigations didn't get the same resources. I looked at the timeline Sarah had constructed. 20 years of David and Linda Rivera moving from city to city, burning buildings, collecting money, and disappearing whenever someone got too close to the truth. 20 years of them living free while I grew up in foster care, wondering what I had done wrong to make my parents abandon me. Why come back? Why risk everything by moving to Chicago, by moving to the same neighborhood where they tried to kill me? Sarah pulled out one final document, a financial report that looked like it had been printed that morning. Because they're broke. The offshore accounts have been frozen by federal investigators. Their last 3 insurance claims were denied due to suspicious circumstances. And Linda Rivera has been diagnosed with a chronic illness that's expensive to treat. So they came back to finish what they started. Looks that way. They probably thought you were dead or long gone. They probably figured they could set another fire, collect another insurance payout, and disappear again before anyone asked too many questions. Instead, they found themselves being rescued by the daughter they tried to murder. Sarah nodded. The universe has a sense of irony. Tommy stood up and started pacing around the small room. This is insane. We saved people who are serial arsonists, who tried to commit murder, who probably killed a witness. We saved residents who were trapped in a fire, I corrected. That's our job. Even when those residents are monsters? Especially then.
Because the alternative was becoming monsters ourselves. And I'd spent 20 years making sure that David and Linda Rivera couldn't turn me into something like them. even if they were still trying. The interrogation room at the district station felt like a stage set for the final act of a play I'd been rehearsing my entire life. Sarah Kim had arranged for David and Linda to be brought in for questioning about the arson investigation. Standard procedure, she told them, just routine follow-up for insurance purposes. They sat across from me now, still in the clothes they'd worn when Tommy pulled them from the burning building. David's button-down was wrinkled and stained with smoke. Linda's jewelry looked tarnished under the harsh fluorescent lights. They still didn't know who I was. "This shouldn't take long," Sarah said, settling into her chair with files that contained 20 years of their crimes. "We just need to clarify a few details about tonight's incident." David leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd been through this process before. "Of course. Though I have to say, Detective, this seems excessive for what was clearly an electrical fire." Was it? Because our preliminary investigation suggests the fire was started with accelerants, multiple ignition points, burn patterns consistent with deliberate arson. Linda's hands fluttered to her throat like she was checking for a pulse. "Arson? Who would want to burn down our building?" "That's what we're trying to determine, Mrs." Sarah made a show of checking her notes. "Smith. Though I notice your identification shows a different address than the one where you were rescued tonight." The first crack in their facade. David's confidence flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. "We've moved recently, haven't had time to update everything with the DMV." "I see. And before you moved to Chicago, where were you living?" "Denver," Linda said quickly. "Atlanta," David said at the same time. They looked at each other with the kind of panic that comes from realizing your carefully constructed lies are falling apart in real time. "Which was it?" Sarah asked. "We spent time in both cities. Work required a lot of travel." "What kind of work?" Another pause, another moment of silent communication between two people who'd been running cons together for decades. "Insurance," Linda said finally. "Consulting," David corrected. Sarah made notes with the careful attention of someone documenting every inconsistency for future use. "Insurance, consulting. Interesting. What kind of insurance?" I'd been silent through the questioning, watching my biological parents lie their way through another interrogation, watching them use the same manipulative techniques they probably used to escape consequences for 20 years. But now, I spoke. "Property insurance. Specifically, fire damage claims." David looked at me for the first time since the questioning began, really looked like he was trying to figure out why the fire chief was sitting in on a routine arson interview. That's right," he said slowly. "Fire damage assessment. It must be emotionally difficult work, seeing families lose everything in fires, especially when children are involved." Something flickered in Linda's eyes. A recognition that wasn't quite recognition, like seeing a face in a crowd that reminded you of someone you've lost. "It can be challenging," she admitted. "I imagine it would be particularly hard if you'd ever lost a child yourself." The room went dead quiet. Sarah stopped taking notes. David stopped fidgeting with his shirt cuffs. Linda stopped breathing. "I'm sorry," David said. "Children who die in fires. Must be difficult to investigate those cases when you've experienced that kind of loss personally." David's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Chief Smith. Chief Pamela Smith." Linda made a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. 20 years ago," I continued, "you had a daughter named Pamela Rivera. She died in a fire at 412 Oakwood Towers. At least, that's what you told the insurance company." David stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "I think we need a lawyer." "Sit down," Sarah said firmly. "Nobody's under arrest. Yet." He sat, but his hands were shaking now. "The thing about insurance fraud involving fake deaths is that it only works if the person actually dies. If they survive, if they grow up, if they become someone with the authority to investigate suspicious fires, then all those old lies start to unravel." Linda was staring at me now with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that might kill her. "You can't be," she whispered. "Can't be what, Linda?" "You can't be our Pamela. Our Pamela died. We buried her. We mourned her." "No, I said, standing up and removing my fire chief's badge and setting it on the table between us. You left her to die. You collected insurance money on her death. You never buried her because you never looked back to see if she survived. David was shaking his head like he could deny reality through force of will. This is impossible. You're too old. You're too successful, too stable, too alive. I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo. 8-year-old Pamela Rivera in a hospital bed, unconscious and covered in bandages. This is what your daughter looked like after Captain Rodriguez pulled her from the coal chute where you left her to die. This is what survival looked like after you walked away. Linda started crying, not the manipulative tears of someone trying to gain sympathy, but the raw, ugly crying of someone whose past had finally caught up with them. We thought you were dead. The hospital said, they said you wouldn't make it. So you filed a death certificate and left town.
We were scared. We were broke. David said the insurance money would give us a fresh start. And Carlos Mendez, the maintenance worker who saw you leave me behind, was killing him part of your fresh start too? David's mask finally slipped completely. That was an accident. Was it? Just like tonight's fire was an accident? Sarah leaned forward. David Rivera, Linda Rivera, you're under arrest for insurance fraud, arson, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. But I wasn't listening to the Miranda rights. I was watching my parents, my biological parents, the people who'd given me life and then tried to take it back, finally face consequences for their choices. 20 years. 20 years of wondering if I'd imagined how bad it had been. 20 years of therapy and foster care and building a life from the ashes of the one they'd tried to burn down. And now, finally, justice. Not revenge, not the satisfaction of watching them suffer, just the simple, clean justice of truth being acknowledged and consequences being applied. It felt exactly like I'd hoped it would. And nothing like I'd expected. 3 months later, I stood outside Cook County Jail with keys to a future I'd never planned to need. David and Linda Rivera, I refused to call them Smith anymore, had been denied bail. Flight risk, the judge had said. Pattern of interstate crime. Danger to witnesses. All true. All irrelevant to why I was here. You don't have to do this, Rodriguez said, from the driver's seat. He'd insisted on coming, probably afraid I'd do something that couldn't be undone. You don't owe them anything. I don't owe them forgiveness. I owe myself closure. The visiting room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Gray walls, metal tables, plastic chairs bolted to the floor. The kind of place designed to strip away pretense and leave only truth. David entered first, wearing orange that made his skin look sallow. Prison had aged him in ways that money never could. His shoulders had the defeated slump of someone who'd finally run out of places to hide. Linda followed, moving like her bones were made of glass. The medical wing had been treating her illness, but she looked fragile in a way that had nothing to do with her diagnosis. They sat across from me in handcuffs, separated by bulletproof glass and 20 years of lies. Pamela, Linda's voice came through the intercom speaker, distorted and small. You came. I came to tell you something. David leaned forward, probably hoping for forgiveness or family reconciliation. Some television movie ending where love conquers all and past sins are washed away by tears and good intentions. I want you to understand what you did. Not just the crime, not just the insurance fraud or the attempted murder. I want you to understand what you took from me. Linda was already crying. David's job was set like he was preparing for an attack. We didn't murder you. You survived. No thanks to you. I survived because a rookie firefighter named Marcus Rodriguez pulled me from that coal chute. I survived because strangers in the hospital fought to keep me alive while you were filing death certificates. I survived because foster families took in a traumatized kid and helped her heal. We thought you were dead, Linda repeated, like saying it enough times might make it true. You hoped I was dead. There's a difference. I stood up, my time with them measured in minutes I'd never get back. I didn't come here for apologies. I came to tell you that despite everything you did to destroy me, I became someone worth saving. I built a life. I help people. I save lives every day, including yours. David finally spoke. What do you want from us? Nothing. I want nothing from you. I wanted you to know that the 8-year-old girl you left to die grew up to be someone you could never break. I turned to leave, then stopped. And I wanted you to know that the next time someone sets a fire in my city, I'll be there to put it out. Every time. Because that's who I chose to become. The courthouse steps felt like a stage where justice had finally remembered its lines. Sarah Kim emerged from the building with the kind of smile that prosecutors get when airtight cases end exactly as they should. Guilty on all counts, she announced to the gathered media. David and Linda Rivera have been sentenced to 25 years each for arson, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory to murder in the death of Carlos Mendez. 25 years. They'd be in their 80s when they got out, if they lived that long. If Linda's illness didn't take her first. If David's ego didn't get him killed in prison. Commissioner Walsh stepped up to the microphone cluster with the smooth confidence of someone who'd practiced the speech in her office mirror. The Chicago Fire Department is proud of the professionalism displayed by Chief Smith and her team throughout this investigation. Their dedication to duty, even in the face of personal trauma, exemplifies the highest standards of public service. Personal trauma. Like my parents trying to murder me was a minor inconvenience I overcame through positive thinking and departmental training. But I didn't correct her. The story the media would tell was simpler than the truth of what it meant to save people who'd tried to kill you. Sometimes simple stories were what people needed.
Tommy Brennan stood beside me in his dress uniform, probably still processing the fact that his first major rescue had involved saving serial killers. He'd handled the media attention better than expected, mostly by repeating that he'd just been doing his job. "Chief Smith," a reporter called out, "how does it feel to know that your parents will spend the rest of their lives in prison?" I stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the crowd of journalists, department officials, and curious onlookers who'd come to witness the end of a 20-year-old story. David and Linda Rivera aren't my parents. Parents protect their children. They made a choice 20 years ago to value money over their daughter's life. They made that same choice again 3 months ago when they set fire to a building where innocent people lived. Do you forgive them? The question I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Forgiveness isn't mine to give or withhold. That's between them and whatever conscience they might have left. My job was to make sure they faced consequences for their choices. The law has done that. What's next for you? I looked over at Rodriguez, who'd been my anchor through all of this, at Tommy Brennan, who'd learned that heroism was more complicated than the stories suggested, at Sarah Kim, who'd built an unshakable case against people who'd been escaping justice for decades. Next, I go back to work. There are fires to fight and people to save. That's what I do. 6 months later, I stood in the ruins of 412 Oakwood Towers for the first time since I was 8 years old. The city had finally demolished the condemned shell that had stood here for 2 decades, and developers were preparing to build something new on the ashes of my childhood. The coal chute was gone. The basement where Rodriguez had found me was filled with rubble. Nothing remained of the place where Pamela Rivera had nearly died and Pamela Smith had been born.
Strange to be back here, Rodriguez said beside me. He'd aged in the months since the trial, the weight of seeing his rescued child confront her past taking its toll. Not strange, I said. Necessary. I'd brought something with me, a letter I'd never sent, written to 8-year-old me during one particularly difficult therapy session years ago. The therapist had suggested it as an exercise in self-compassion. I'd kept it in my desk drawer ever since, waiting for the right moment. The right moment had finally come. I read it out loud in the empty lot where my childhood had ended. Dear Pamela, you're going to survive this. I know it doesn't feel like it right now. I know you're scared and hurt and confused about why the people who were supposed to love you left you behind. But you're going to survive, and you're going to build something beautiful from the ashes they left you in. You're going to help people. You're going to save lives. You're going to become someone who chooses to protect others instead of destroying them. You're going to prove that what people do to you doesn't have to determine who you become. Rodriguez was quiet beside me, probably thinking about the frightened child he'd pulled from this place and the woman she'd become. You're going to be okay, Pamela. More than okay. You're going to be exactly who you choose to be. I folded the letter and let the wind take it, watching it disappear into the sky above Chicago. 20 years of carrying that scared little girl around, and finally, I could let her rest. Ready to go? Rodriguez asked. I looked around the empty lot one more time. Tomorrow they'd break ground on affordable housing units designed to help families in crisis, new beginnings built on old endings. Yeah, I said, I'm ready. We walked back to the truck together, leaving the past buried under construction plans and the promise of something better. Behind us, the city continued its work of burning down and building up, destroying and creating, ending stories and beginning new ones. The cycle continued, but this time, I was helping to write it. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of the Riverside Community Center, looking out at an audience that included foster kids, social workers, firefighters, and families who'd survived their own versions of hell. The Phoenix Foundation's first annual fundraiser had drawn more people than we'd ever expected. Behind me, a banner read, "From Ashes to Action, Supporting Children in Crisis." My name is Pamela Smith, and when I was 8 years old, my parents tried to kill me for insurance money. The room went quiet in the way audiences do when someone starts telling a story they know will matter. I survived because of people who chose to act when action mattered. A rookie firefighter who pulled me from a coal chute, foster families who took in a traumatized kid, teachers who saw potential in a child who'd learned too early that the world could be cruel. In the front row, Rodriguez sat next to his wife, both of them beaming with the pride of people who'd watched someone they loved transform pain into purpose. Tommy Brennan was there too, now a full lieutenant and the Foundation's volunteer coordinator. Tonight, we're not here to talk about what was done to us. We're here to talk about what we're going to do for others. I gestured to the presentation screen behind me, showing photos of the families we'd already helped. Kids removed from dangerous situations before they escalated. Parents getting intervention services instead of having their children taken away. Foster families receiving support and training to break cycles of trauma. The Phoenix Foundation exists because I learned something important the night I saved the people who tried to kill me. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about preventing others from suffering the same harm. Mrs. Vasquez, now 83 and sharper than ever, nodded approvingly from her seat near the stage. She'd become our most effective community liaison, using 7 decades of neighborhood knowledge to identify at-risk families before crisis hit. In the past year, we've provided intervention services to 43 families. We've prevented 12 children from entering the foster system by giving their parents the support they needed to be safe caregivers. We've helped 19 kids aging out of foster care find stable housing and job training. The applause was warm, but I wasn't finished. But the number I'm most proud of is 0. 0 children have died in suspicious fires in our target neighborhoods since we started our prevention programs. 0 families have lost everything because someone decided their lives were worth less than money. I looked out at faces that represented every part of the community we served. Social workers who'd seen too much, firefighters who understood the weight of arriving too late, foster kids who'd survived their own abandonments. David and Linda Rivera are serving 25-year sentences in federal prison. They can't hurt anyone else. But there are other David and Linda Riveras out there, other families in crisis, other children at risk. My voice strengthened as I reached the part of the speech I'd practiced but never quite believed I'd have the courage to deliver. I didn't rebuild the house that tried to bury me. I built something new, something that makes sure no 8-year-old has to wonder why the people who were supposed to love them chose money instead. The standing ovation lasted longer than I'd expected. When it finally died down, I looked directly into the news cameras that would carry this story to other cities, other communities, other children who needed to know that survival was possible. Have you ever been written off by the people who were supposed to protect you? Have you ever had your family try to erase you, literally or emotionally? Drop your story in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes the quietest ones come back with the loudest legacy. I stepped away from the podium and walked into an audience that had become a community. People surrounded me with stories of their own survival, their own transformation, their own commitment to making sure other children had the protection they'd lacked. This was justice. Not the cold satisfaction of watching my parents get sentenced, though that had been necessary too. This was the warm, living justice of turning trauma into protection for others, of making sure the cycle stopped with me. Behind me, the banner caught the light, from ashes to action. I'd kept the promise I'd made to 8-year-old me in that empty lot. I'd become exactly who I chose to be. And I was just getting started. 5 years later, the call came at 3 a.m. like they always do. House fire on the south side, family trapped, multiple children inside. But this time felt different as I suited up in the darkness of Station 19. This time, I was responding to a house that shouldn't have been burning. The Martinez family. We'd visited them 6 months ago through the Phoenix Foundation's prevention program, installed smoke detectors, fixed faulty wiring, taught the kids escape routes, given them safety plans they'd practiced until it became muscle memory. I pulled up to see flames climbing the exterior walls of their 2-story home. Engine 19 already in position. Tommy Brennan, now Captain Brennan, coordinating the response with the precision of someone who'd learned that every second mattered. "Chief, families accounted for," he called out. All 6 members evacuated safely. Minor smoke inhalation on the youngest, but they're stable. All 6. Safe. Because smoke detectors had given them the warning they needed. Because escape plans had gotten them out before the smoke could trump them. Because neighbors we'd trained knew to call 911 immediately and help with evacuation. Rodriguez appeared at my elbow, now officially retired but still riding along as a volunteer because some people never really leave the job that saved them. Remember when house fires meant body bags? He said quietly. I do remember. I remember when we arrived too late, more often than we arrived in time. When prevention was something we talked about but never funded. When children died because no one had taught their families that fires could be survived if you planned for them. Mrs. Martinez wants to thank you, Tommy said, gesturing toward the ambulance where the family was being checked by paramedics. I walked over to where Rosa Martinez sat with her 6-year-old daughter on her lap. The little girl had the same wide, scared eyes I probably had 28 years ago when the world tried to burn me alive. Chief Smith, Rosa said, tears streaming down her face. The smoke detectors woke us up, just like you said they would. My babies are alive because of you. Her babies. Alive. Safe. Untraumatized by abandonment or betrayal or the knowledge that money mattered more than their lives. Your babies are alive because you listened, because you prepared, because you chose to protect them.
The little girl looked up at me with curiosity instead of fear.
Are you a real fire chief?
I am.
Did you always want to fight fires?
I knelt down to her level, seeing myself at 6 years old, before David and Linda Rivera had shown me what parents could choose to do to their children. No, I said, but sometimes life shows you what you're meant to do, and I'm meant to make sure kids like you stay safe. She smiled and leaned against her mother, secure in the knowledge that the adults around her would protect her, the way it should be, the way it would be for every child I could reach. I stood up and looked around the scene. No body bags, no grieving families, no children learning that the world could abandon them without warning. Just a family that would go to a hotel tonight and rebuild tomorrow, together and alive. That's justice. That's legacy. That's what it looks like when you choose to build instead of burn. I'm Pamela Smith. I'm 33. I run the largest fire prevention program in the Midwest. Every night I go to sleep knowing that tomorrow, fewer children will wonder if they're worth saving. Because they all are, every single one of them. And that's a promise I'll keep until the day I die. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.